This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details. Every time I speak with someone about the Nintendo 64 library, I'm generally met with the view that almost every good game on the system was made by Nintendo. And while it's true that the high cost of cartridges as compared to the CDs that Sony was using on the PlayStation drove many third parties away, those that stayed were willing to invest. And in my opinion, that resulted in a small but generally high-quality library of third-party games. My name is John Rairdin. Welcome to Third Party 64, where we'll explore the often unsung third-party library of the Nintendo 64. The rules are simple. We'll only cover games that were not developed, published, or contracted by Nintendo. With that, let's get to today's game. Atari's Battlezone was first released in arcades in 1980 and was an early example of 3D video games. It is extremely important and influential in the history of gaming, but it struggled to find a strong footing as a franchise over the last 40 years. But in 1998, Activision released a PC sequel, simply called Battlezone, that fused the original first-person tank combat with real-time strategy. It was a deep and complicated title that, while not selling particularly well, reviewed very positively and has since achieved a minor cult classic status. 2 years later, Battlezone would arrive on the Nintendo 64 as Battlezone: Rise of the Black Dogs, complete with brand new content and modes. Battlezone was one of those games I'd rent as a kid on a pretty regular basis. Ever since playing Wing Commander on the Super Nintendo, I've loved complex combat sims, and Battlezone was about as much complexity as you could possibly fit on a Nintendo 64 controller. However, the Nintendo 64 port distinguished itself from some other complex PC ports by introducing an alternative play mode, specifically for the Nintendo 64. In the original PC release, you'd both control your tank from first person, engaging in fast-paced vehicular combat with enemies, while also managing your base, as in real-time strategy or RTS gameplay. While your mouse and the WASD keys would control your movement, much of the remaining keyboard was used to navigate menus and issue commands. Just like any RTS, you'd need to build your base, which in Battlezone required you to place deployable buildings on geysers. These structures could then be used to produce additional deployable buildings and units. You'd need to build scavengers to harvest materials from nearby deposits, turrets to help defend your base, and additional tanks to join you in fighting the enemy. The Nintendo 64 version preserves absolutely all of this, and makes use of the entire Nintendo 64 controller to do so. You control your tank itself using the C buttons to move and the control stick to look around. It isn't far off from a modern dual analog layout and mimics the PC controls quite well. Meanwhile, all of your commands were assigned to the D-pad, allowing you to move through multiple layers of menus without ever pausing the game. That being said, perhaps due to an inherent awareness of the less simulation-focused console audience and the already niche sales of the original PC release, the decision was made to include two brand new single-player modes in the Nintendo 64 version. The first of these is a simple arcade mode. This mode somewhat replicates the flow of the original Battlezone of 1980. You're dropped onto a map and simply need to wipe out every enemy to move on. It's simple, straightforward, and features none of the complex RTS elements of the original single player. The second new mode is the pilot mode. This mode has all the same levels and content as the traditional single player from the PC version, but with the RTS elements handled by the game itself. The levels play out the same, and all of your objectives for completing the level remain, but you no longer need to worry about constructing your base or managing multiple units. Rather, you are merely a single pilot taking orders just like everyone else. Pilot mode was a great acknowledgement of the difference in audience at the time between PC and console, while also not removing the option to play the game as originally designed on PC, which was appropriately renamed to Commander mode. An entirely new campaign was added called the Black Dogs campaign, in addition to including the original two campaigns from the PC version. Split-screen multiplayer was also available, complete with the option to add bots to fill out the player count. The sheer amount of content in Battlezone Rise of the Black Dogs was one of the reasons I kept coming back to it as a kid. It felt like there was always more to do. I'd often play through a level first in pilot mode, then return to it in commander mode to add additional complexity once I had mastered the basics. If you want to play the game today via official means, you have two avenues. You can, of course, hunt down the Nintendo 64 cartridge, which I'll also mention is appropriately black rather than the standard gray. However, due to the relative obscurity and an evidently low print run, it isn't the most common Nintendo 64 game out there. That being said, the original PC version was somewhat recently remastered, and is available on digital PC platforms as Battlezone 98 Redux. This is actually the version I've been showing whenever I talk about the PC version in this video. It's very nicely touched up with HD visuals and includes some nice graphical updates. However, it also doesn't have any of the exclusive content from the Nintendo 64 version, such as the additional Black Dogs campaign, pilot mode, or arcade mode. Battlezone Rise of the Black Dogs is, in my opinion, one of the most ambitious PC ports on the Nintendo 64. Not just in terms of porting a deeply complex game to the Nintendo 64, but the added challenge of providing multiple modes of play to better suit the gameplay to the audience. While I do also own this game on PC, the Nintendo 64 version will always be my favorite, simply because of how much it adds to the original release. This is a game I never see anyone bring up when talking about the Nintendo 64, but it absolutely deserves a spot in anyone's collection, and perfectly encapsulates the hidden gems to be found among third-party Nintendo 64 releases. For this reason, I thought it was a perfect way to start off this series. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know if you've ever played Battlezone Rise of the Black Dogs down in the comments. I'd also love to know if you have any recommendations for other third-party Nintendo 64 games I should take a look at. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV, and checking out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more. You can chat with us about this or anything else Nintendo related in our Discord, using the link in the description. If you'd like to get a hold of me directly, you can reach out to me on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days, using the handle on screen. Once again, my name's John Rairdin, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.